Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So today I'm looking at Timewalker dungeons, and you might be thinking, well, what the hell, you already looked at them. Well, there's actually some good news. They have went through another tuning pass. Now, the tuning is not perfect. In no way is it perfect. However, the stuff is a lot better. To the point where I wasn't planning on doing this video, but I'm now actually decently excited about the feature. It really is amazing what a little bit of difficulty can do. However, it's not really a great amount of difficulty, and the only reason why people are dying right here in the video is because this boss has actually got a mechanic where he spell reflects everyone, or just reflects all damage, which none of us seem to know about, and that's what caused the group to die in such a spectacular fashion. But after that, we really were fine. And what I've noticed with the Timewalker dungeons and the sort of main change that they've done since the last iteration is that damage and health are a little bit higher, especially enemy health. Well, it's more, I think, that our damage is actually down a little bit, and a few scaling bugs were fixed. Overall, it does tie into be just a far better experience. Doing 2 dungeons took me, I think it was 45 minutes, and a lot of that's because, like, when you're fighting mobs and things like that, it's not that you have a great deal of mechanics to deal with, because these aren't crazy mechanically, like, difficult mobs. It is the old dungeons, but you've still got, like, you've got enemies to fight through, and in the old version of Timewalker dungeons, everything just, you know, drop of a hat, died, you know, went from 100 health to 0 in a blink of an eye, whereas now you actually do have to work your way through mobs, and it does add a little bit more of a feeling of progression to these dungeons. Now, right here we're in the Mana Tombs, and what I did find to be pretty cool is some of the trash mobs, actually. So, those priests that I'm killing right now, if you let them just, you know, stay alive, they would start healing other guys, so that mechanic actually was there, it worked, it happened. It wasn't that much of a problem, but, you know, it's best to kill the priest. And I was also finding that I was getting mana burned as a Ret Paladin, which meant that sometimes I couldn't use any spells. And it's mechanics like that that I really love about doing some of these older dungeons. Now, from what I gathered, it didn't really affect the healer when it happened to the healer because they just regen their mana so quick, it was never really an issue. But still, being mana burned is very cool. There's a few times where I was feared, and in general, some of the mechanics actually do things. So I hope they continue to tune this in such a way the mechanics matter. Now, this boss here, I'm showing you the full footage for some reason, when I cut this before I recorded it, but he doesn't have that many mechanics anyway. I think he's just a pretty boring boss, and the time he did do a mechanic, I didn't even notice it, and the healer didn't even notice it. So, now that I've mentioned the healer, it's probably worth talking about what the incoming damage feels like. Simply put, it just isn't high enough for, like, I'd say regular attacks from enemies. So, what does that mean? Well, sometimes, like, and you'll see this later on in Shattered Halls, if you stand in a bad mechanic, you will get a decent amount of damage, but it seems like the regular damage that's doled out to players just isn't high enough. You can't actually see the party health meters and all that stuff, or the party panel, at the minute, because I do use a 34-inch 40 by 1440 monitor, which is a different aspect ratio to a 1080p monitor, so imagine there's like another, I don't know, fifth of the screen to the left and to the right, and that's where that bar is for me. But anyway, the tank's health wasn't really fluctuating that much. It was pretty much always within the top 75% of their health bars, so that was a little bit of a pity, if I'm honest. So the incoming damage definitely does need to be tuned up, and I'd say the health of enemies also needs to be tuned up. Probably a 40% increase to both would be good, and that's a 40% increase to enemy health, and also a 40% increase to enemy, like, white damage. So not ability damage. Ability damage, I think, needs to be tuned on an ability-by-ability basis, because there are 1 or 2 abilities which actually do matter. Now, here I'm actually fighting Nexus Prince Shafar, I think is the name of the guy. And what was unfortunate is he really didn't do a great deal of damage, but all of his mechanics were going on, and as you can see, his health bar isn't just plummeting at a ridiculous degree, which allows the fight to play out. And I think one of the biggest problems about the way these Timewalkers used to be is, you know, even if they were easy, what was even worse is that you never even saw the mechanics at all. Well, now you're actually seeing the mechanics, and that does fill me with a lot of hope. I'm a bit worried that Blizzard will do the regular thing that Blizzard do and just err on the side of making it too easy for, you know, because they think that their player base is super dumb. Well, look, guys, it's a chicken egg scenario. You need to put decently, you know, demanding content in there, else people will never get better. But, you know, they always do balance on the side of things being too easy outside of raids, and I would worry that they won't have another tuning pass of this. I'd say another tuning pass of this with, you know, 25 to 40% more damage and healing, or damage and health for the enemies, would turn this into a really challenging and fun bit of content that's truly engaging. Now, you might be thinking, that's quite a hike up in difficulty. Does that match the rewards? And the answer is yes. They've updated the rewards on these. The Timewalker bits of gear, I think they used to be 630 or 640. Well, now they're 660. That means that they're proper, you know, relevant-ish bits of gear, and I think it's okay that these dungeons are pretty hard. Now that I've talked a little bit about balance, and I will go back just on a case-by-case basis whenever something interesting happens in the background here, but what I want to talk about is the feeling of doing the dungeons. Now that we've had a version of them that's actually tuned so that it does take a minute and you are actually really progressing through a dungeon at a rate that doesn't feel like a complete speedrun, it actually was a very enjoyable experience, despite the fact it needs to be harder. Yes, it does, but it was enjoyable, it was fun, and I was getting great vibes off. And what do I mean by great vibes? Well, dungeon design was very different back then. There was no boomy music, or less boomy music. Things were a little bit more low-key, but in many ways I found it to be sort of, I guess, atmospheric and immersive. A lot of it does tie back to the music of WoW back in the day. I've got to say, sometimes I really do prefer the music direction of the Burning Crusade, Vanilla, and Wrath, because it's a little bit less about a specific piece of music, and it's just more about an overall ambience, which I think feeds into just the moodiness of the world and stuff like that a lot better. And it really worked in these dungeons, especially when it was combined with the fact that they weren't at a blistering pace. So that was definitely a very positive thing. Alright, so it's me from the future of the person you heard 30 seconds ago. I've just recorded this video, and when I was going back through it, I noticed that I just cut out this boss fight and forgot to show it to you. So I'm now retroactively showing you this boss fight because it's actually a fight that's worth you seeing, because it illustrates some points that I will either make in the future of this video or have made in the past of this video. I'm not 100% sure. Now, look at my health bar, and you can see it's dropping. I purposely stood in that void zone to test what it was like, and what was rather interesting about it is that while this boss himself deals absolute pants rubbish, not that much damage at all, some of his mechanics actually do a decent amount of damage. So it does show that for some bosses, like, there is still a bit of challenge there. There's still a little bit more fun. And what I would recommend is that, and I'm pretty sure I say this later on in the video, that what Blizzard should do is go through these bosses on a sort of, you know, hand-by-hand or, you know, boss-by-boss basis, and just tune up some of the mechanics to make sure they all matter. That way, I think it would make a more fun experience overall, and you'd have less bosses that are just complete naff that don't really matter. But still, I just thought I'd throw this clip in so that you see that there is actually potential for a bit of fun with these time-walking bosses. I'm just sort of clearing my way through these trash mobs here, and you can see there's a few times throughout this whole video where one or two mobs do go on me and they do a decent amount of damage to me. Well, they don't really do that much damage to the tank, I can assure you of that. And in terms of our item level scaling, everyone is scaled down to item level 95, so I don't believe, like, the characters that were in this dungeon outgearing it. I don't believe that's an issue because we were all normalized. This guy here, Bloodguard, Porung or whatever, you'll probably notice he's basically doing nothing. He's not actually a boss on the Timewalker Dungeon Journal, but when I looked at his abilities, all that he has normally is a cleave anyway, which does harken back to the fact that bosses back in the day were a very different kettle of fish, and I think a lot more of the difficulty did come from the fact that classes were more clunky, and a lot of classes, you know, they didn't have an answer to every single question, whereas now, no matter what your class is, you have an answer to everything. You can deal with nearly every problem, and that does definitely affect the difficulty, and perhaps that's the reason why I think they need to tune just some of the raw healing and damage up a little bit more, because it doesn't really feel like it's matched with how much more capable our classes have become over time. Now, we're going up to this guy, the War Master dude, and this is one of the first bosses, I suppose, like with Nexus Prince Shafar, that actually felt like a true boss, in that it took a bit of time to kill him, and he did do some mechanics. Oddly enough, he didn't do mechanics a lot at the start. but he did this thing where he would jump around from person to person, whack them. He took the hunter down to 33% health, and the hunter had to disengage back. And that was really quite cool, and that gave me a bit of a glimmer of hope in a way, that if they can make other bosses feel like that, this will be a decently fun bit of content. Now, sure, it's not going to be like, say, Skyreach, where if you just stand in Ranjit's fire, or not fire, like the little wind walls, you'll get killed. It's not like that, but at least it's something, right? So yeah, a bit more damage would be nice. Another thing that I think they should do is they should increase the rate at which these bosses do their mechanics, because I've got a feeling that they did take quite a bit longer to kill back in the day. By the way, I don't have a, back then I pretty much didn't do these on Heroic, so I have no idea what that difficulty actually was like to play. I know it was hard, just not from personal experience. But what I would like is if these bosses would just do their mechanics more often. I think that would make the fights feel just a little bit more snappy. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to modernize the fights, but I'm trying to make them appeal a little bit more to the modern player, because during the downtime of a fight, back in the day, I'd imagine if you were a healer, you were worrying about your mana. If you were a DPS or something, you were worrying about your threat. Whereas now in downtime during a fight, you're just attacking because threat's not an issue and mana isn't really an issue. So making those mechanics happen more and more and more would absolutely be a good bit of design. I've got no idea what way they actually program them in. I suppose for some bosses it's based just on health, but they're only putting in, what, 10 dungeons for Timewalker between Wrath and TBC, so they could even go in and tune it on a boss-by-boss basis. But I think definitely what they need to do is they need to go through these and tweak things specifically. Right now it feels like they've just applied a sort of damage and health modifier to everything. I think there does need to be a little bit of hand tuning here and there. And the good news is that, you know, these are a weekly bonus event thingy. Maybe they could push out a tiny client patch at some point if they really needed to fix something up. Probably not, but there's enough time in the PTR for them to make this feature good. And that's basically nearly it for the video. I edited it down to about 12 minutes because a trash pack's a trash pack. The trash packs back then, bar the ones that had the mana burn, they don't really do a terrible deal, so I didn't want to waste your time, and I didn't really want to ramble that much either. Basically, I'm excited about this feature now. I've got a lot more faith in it than I used to have. I still think it needs to be harder. I think there needs to be another tuning pass, but my feedback is that this now feels like a bit of content. It doesn't feel like an absolute waste of time, and that's definitely good. Though, as you will have heard in one of my more recent videos, I would like it if there was a bit more done in terms of rewards, etc, etc, but right now the actual content itself is on the up, and hopefully they do tune it up to be a bit harder. Anyway, that is it for me. Thank you very much for watching the video. Let me know what you think down in the comments, hit that like button, and I will see you next time.